Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is still Tuesday, May the 15th, 2018, TowerGate Day 431. This is part 2, so a little kind of a late afternoon second edition to pick up on where we left off because there's so much to cover and I babble so much. So anyway, let's keep going. I mentioned to you in the last thing I mentioned in the first video was about the Harry Reid situation, so we've taken care of that. Harry Reid has cancer. Okay. But the next story I'm coming up on is, by the way, these are stories I'm just catching up on that the past couple days we were so busy I couldn't get to them. They're not major stories, but they're important enough to talk about, and I just got a list of them I'm trying to go through here. So the next story is this liberal mayor of Oakland, California, Libby Schaaf, is now facing a lawsuit for tipping off illegals to the ICE raids. Okay, this is not a criminal case, this is a civil case, but the documents and the evidence that are going to be presented in this case could very likely lead to a criminal investigation. Now, if you remember when all this went down and this liberal mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, did that press conference and let all these illegals know that ICE was about to raid them, she was taken to task over that, and she said that she would be willing to go to jail for the cause. And if things keep going in this direction, it looks like she just may get her wish. Next, we have Paul Sperry of the New York Post. Now, for those of you who've been following my videos for a while, you know that Paul Sperry of the New York Post, he doesn't write a lot of stories, but every time he does, they are major bombshells. We've probably covered about a half a dozen Paul Sperry stories, maybe a few more than that, over the last, say, year, maybe. So, anyway, he doesn't write a lot of articles, less than once a month, on this topic. And but when he does write an article on this topic, it's usually a bombshell. So, Paul Sperry, New York Post, has written an article that says that the spy that was planted to spy on the Trump campaign, to set the espionage traps, is the word he uses, to set the espionage traps, was actually planted by the State Department, John Kerry, along with Peter Strzok and Mr. Potato Head, John Brennan. So here, he fingers the State Department. Remember yesterday where I said something tells me that the EC and the CIA and Mr. Potato Head, John Brennan, may have been the beginning of the paper trail, but that doesn't mean they were the beginning of the planting of the spy inside the campaign, who we believe is Mr. Halper. No confirmation on that yet. We're still waiting. Almost 5 days now and waiting. No one has denied it. So this is very interesting because, remember, the Rotten Reverend Clinton was head of the State Department, and then she left to go campaign for president, and John Kerry came in to replace her. But all the people still working there at the State Department, those are Hillary's people. And of course we know the role that Jonathan Weiner played from the State Department. We know the role that Cody Shearer was playing and all these other people. Victoria F. the EU Newland, we know that she was involved in this. We know that Christopher Steele was involved in this. It was Victoria F.U. Newland that had to give permission for Weiner to go talk to Christopher Steele, and then that information found its way into the hands of the State Department, likely to John Kerry, and then it was also pumped into the FBI. So it looks like Mr. Sperry of the New York Post, Paul Sperry, is suggesting that the spy was planted not just by Brennan and Comey and Clapper, but that John Kerry and the State Department were instrumental, and of course Peter's been stroking us is in the mix as well. So it's really hard to know exactly who the players were that put that into motion, whether Rotten Reverend Clinton working with Brennan, whether it was Brennan working with Comey, or who knows. We know that Comey, Brennan, and Clapper are the ones who authorized the nearly $283,000 that was paid to Mr. Halper during the 2016 campaign for something. We need to learn what and why. Of course, we have Iran now threatening to release news of Western leaders who took bribes on the Iran nuke deal. And now we know why the Europeans and why Hillary Clinton and why John Kerry and why all these people are freaking out. This is why they're freaking out. Now, what happened here is, first, to understand the way these sanctions work. When we impose sanctions, like we impose sanctions on North Korea for years and Iran for years, but we have no trade with either North Korea or Iran. So we can impose sanctions on them all we want, really. Really doesn't hurt them. We don't have any trade with them. It's other countries, particularly Europeans and China, who trade with North Korea and Iran. And so in order for the sanctions to be effective, you really have to get the Europeans and China, particularly in the case of North Korea, to be all in on them sanctions. But that takes a lot of political courage, which unfortunately Obama did not have, nor did Bush, nor did anyone before him. It wasn't until Trump came along and exercised some real authority and told China, hey, you know, you're the key to all this. You've got to participate, and if you don't, we are going to make it tough on you. And he went to the Europeans and said, hey, you know, you've got to get on board. If your companies are doing business with Iran, then you're not helping the cause. And if you do that, we, the United States, are going to punish your European companies who are continuing to trade with Iran and possibly even North Korea. So this is where the crux of the problem is. So this is what Trump is telling Europeans. We're pulling out of the deal, and when we get a new deal, the deal is going to require that you all participate and not trade with Iran, and certainly not North Korea. And this is why the Europeans are raising so much hell. This is why the Right Reverend Clinton, all those are raising so much hell. Because here is what was tweeted out by the senior advisor to Mr. Zarif, the president of Iran. His senior advisor tweeted out, prior to Trump killing the deal, of course, if the Europeans stop trading with Iran and don't put pressure on the U.S., then we will reveal which Western politicians and how much money they received during the nuclear negotiations to make the Iran nuke deal happen. So basically, here's the number 2 man to Zarif saying, basically telling us that there were bribes involved in the Iran nuclear deal. There were bribes involved. Those bribes went to Western politicians. Well, that would include probably Europeans, Americans, Canadians, Australians, and the like. Now we know why Kerry and Clinton and the Europeans are going apeshit. Because they know that they took bribes. And now we know why they deposited cash, $160 billion in cash, a lot of it in euros, on the tarmac in Tehran. Because there's so much bribe money. Unbelievable. Well, it looks like this threat was made before Trump announced he would kill the deal. But now he's killed the deal. And he's also said he is going to make sure that these European and other countries live up to the sanctions that they're getting ready to impose on Iran, to crumble them, to bring them to their knees. And if they don't, Trump has stated that he is going to penalize them seriously, financially, if they continue to do business with Iran. So this is exactly what the power play is. So now Iran's saying, yeah, well, if, as he says here, if Europeans stop trading with Iran, if Europeans stop trading with Iran, which is exactly what Trump's going to force them to do. He's going to penalize them if they don't. But the Iranians are saying, if you do allow Trump to penalize you and you do stop trading with us, we're going to drop the dime on you and let the whole world know who the Western politicians were who took bribes. Oh my. The Obama administration, one gigantic international crime syndicate that's just absolutely no doubt in my mind that this will go down in history as being the most criminal administration in the history of, certainly of America. It may be the most criminal, he may be the most critical in his administration in the history of the world. I mean, this is beyond Banana Republic stuff here. I mean, this is ridiculous. This just in, Mueller has pulled a ham sandwich out of his ass and indicted it. Here's a question for you. Uncle Bob, the executioner, Bob Mueller, filed a report in October. It was 312 pages. There was not a single word about Papadopoulos meeting with Downer. Why not? You see, we couldn't have known about Papadopoulos until December 30th of 2016, after the article that came out by the New York Times. Then, on January 9th, and we're talking about Glenn Simpson here, and on January 9th, Glenn Simpson testifies to Congress. That testimony was released on January 9th, where Simpson stated that the release, that after the release of the story, that there was a guy inside the Trump campaign. And he said after the release that it must have been Downer. So this New York Times story comes out on January 9th, and it tells us about this Papadopoulos meeting with Down the Hatch Downer. Then Simpson comes out and says, yeah, well, I guess that was the guy who was the inside man inside the Trump campaign. But the problem was with this statement by Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS is that he gave his testimony to Congress back in August of 2017. 6 months before that, before Simpson or anyone else even knew about Alexander Down the Hatch Downer. Which means, what that tells us is that when Simpson went before Congress in August of 2017 and he made that statement that he learned from Christopher Steele that they had someone on the inside, that he realized that he made a big mistake. And so to cover his butt after the story came out, he said, yeah, well, Downer, Alexander Downer, yeah, that must have been the guy. But we now know that it couldn't have been the guy that Simpson was talking about, because Glenn Simpson wouldn't have known about Alexander Downer at the time that he testified to Congress in August 2017. He was just trying to cover his butt for saying something he shouldn't have said. So Steele told Simpson that the FBI had a human source inside the campaign. So, was Downer working for the FBI as an inside source? Well, we have no record of them paying him. It appears that that's not likely. It appears that he was basically a contact of Mr. Halper or someone else, maybe Strzok, maybe Clinton's people, maybe someone else. It doesn't appear that Downer was working for the government. We've not been told that. We were told that he just, first we were told he bumped into Papadopoulos in a bar. We now know the meeting was actually set up by Halper. So it wasn't really, Downer wasn't working for, he wasn't the guy running this thing. He was just, another player on the board who was recruited and used by Halper so that he could accomplish what he was doing, because he has ties to them and knows them. But Downer's not your main source. He's just a bit player in this thing. But we have John Brennan, who told Chuck Todd on a Sunday morning show about the ties with British intelligence, not Australian intelligence. In fact, Chuck Todd asked if any of the information that Brennan was using when he was a CIA director came from the Five Eyes countries. And Brennan said, well, he didn't flat deny that, but he said, quote, the FBI has a very close relationship with its British counterparts. And then he went on for another minute or so talking about this relationship with British intelligence. Never even brought up Australia or any of the other Five Eyes nations. Never said a word about them. He focused totally on the British and the relationship that he has with them and that we have with them when it comes to sharing intelligence. Now on December 30th, Andy McCabe told the House Intelligence Committee that on one occasion that he knows of, the FBI sent investigators to London to verify the dossier. So everything suggests here that Downer was not the main FBI source. He was just a bit player that was pulled in probably by Halper or someone else, the State Department, to help them move the information along in the path it needed to go to find itself into the FBI to help support the idea for a Trump-Russian collusion investigation, or whatever they want to call it. It appears from everything that you can see here that the source is someone, and the intelligence people they were dealing with and working with were British, not Australian. And most of these players, all this stuff happened with British people and people around London. Christopher Steele, this guy who owned the little journalist outfit down there, the little, I don't know, I forget his name now, it's on Moore's list. This guy who ran the little shop doing local media stuff, he was involved in spreading information. Everything flowed through Christopher Steele and the State Department, Jonathan Weiner, all these people. Downer is an outlier. This Australian, he is the outlier, but he has connections to British intelligence, knows all these people, was in London. So that's the only reason that Downer was used in the setup, is because he was there. He's available and was known to Halper and other people. This was not an Australian intelligence operation. It was likely a British intelligence operation that was either motivated by Brennan or motivated by someone within the Hillary Clinton campaign, or a coordination between Brennan, the CIA, the Right Reverend Clinton, and British intelligence. And who knows who the instigator would be. You know, take your pick. Could be anybody. Next up, this is something now that is, I'm going to talk about, that's been out there for a while. It's just been bubbling on the surface. You read about it in vlogs and blogs, but you really don't see it ever being talked about or reported in the mainstream media. And Lionel Nation talks about this a lot. Lionel of Lionel Nation, which I'm sure many of you watch. I watch him from time to time when I have time. But he's like me, he does longer videos, so it's harder. He's, of course, a big fan of Q, follows Q, drops a lot of information, and when I do hear stuff about Q, it's usually from Lionel. Of course, I think that Q is someone who talks, I guess, a lot, or the entity Q, whatever that is, talks a lot about these sealed indictments and the child pedophile ring, that's being investigated, and I know that is part of the big part of the wide range of what Q is involved in. Lionel Nation refers to it a lot. And so there was a comment left and a link left by Miss Tree in the comments section. And she left the link, and I looked at it, and one of the sources on the webpage is the Epoch Times, which is a site that I look at 2 or 3 times a week. I like Epoch Times. They don't have a ton of information, and sometimes they don't have updates daily. It's like twice a week. You know, they'll put new stories in there. They post a lot of links you can find other places, but I still like it, and I go to Epoch Times a couple times a week, and they've been all over this as well. They've been one of these sites that follow this thing really closely. And what I'm talking about is this thing that's been going on around for at least 6 months about these sealed indictments. Sealed indictments, and the number being at this point that's being alleged in this story, or reported in this story, is 25,544 currently sealed indictments. That was as of March 30th. Now, it also says here that just in the month of March alone, there were 6,034 new sealed indictments added to that list. And this is suggesting that Jeff Sessions is quite active, but being very quiet about his activities and his investigation. And because this kind of speaks to a lot of people, of course, going after Sessions, and I understand that, but this story would suggest that Sessions is just being very coy. And actually, while it looks like he's doing nothing, he's actually very, very busy behind the scenes, because these sealed indictments would have to, I would believe, have to be approved or known about by the DOJ in D.C. And some of these indictments may come directly from Sessions' office or from his D.C. people here. It's a lot of indictments. It's a 25 times more indictments than is typical or usual. So there's a lot of sealed indictments. Sealed indictments are typically they're either search warrants or arrest warrants. They're typically sealed because a lot of times as the government is going through investigations, they have people on the inside, informants working on developing their case, and they want to go ahead and get the indictments done because they're moving forward on their case. And as they get people, they do the indictments and stuff, but they don't want them to come out until they're ready. So they hold them, keep them out of the public record so that it doesn't blow the cover of undercover informants, or so it doesn't cause the people who are being investigated to be scared away, to be like rats fleeing when someone turns on the light. Because once an indictment comes down on this guy or that guy, well, anyone connected to him, as soon as that's known, they flee. So you don't want to blow the investigation or whatever. So a lot of times they'll file indictments but seal them and not release them. And that's why a lot of times when you see indictments come down on like 20, 30, 40 people in a drug ring or a sex ring or something like that, it all happens in one day. There'll be a news story, okay, they indicted today 35 indictments on so-and-so or 50 indictments. Well, this is why that happens, because they hold these indictments back until they're ready to pounce, and then they release them all the same day. So there are currently 25,544 sealed indictments waiting. We don't know how many of them are arrest or how many of them are search, but that's a hell of a lot of indictments. And so this suggests that maybe Sessions is actually quite busy behind the scenes, more so than what people think, that he might be playing possum after all, or just the way he's handling things. And that kind of leads us to another story that kind of piggybacks off of it, to another website that I like a lot called The American Thinker. And in this story on The American Thinker, they make the following case, that Jeff Sessions is known in his years working in the Justice Department as being a stickler for secrecy in his investigations. He does not like leaks in his investigations. He's known for dotting his I's and crossing his T's. He's not known as a prosecutor who gets cases blown out of court because of procedural errors, mistakes, or things and such. He's known for being able to keep very, very quiet about things that he's doing until he comes out and pounces on you. So this is a sort of a character trait of Jeff Sessions when he was in the Justice Department as a prosecutor. And he is known for making sure that his cases are solid when they go to court, and they do not get thrown out hardly ever, because he doesn't allow leaks. He controls his investigations, and he doesn't get things thrown out on procedural errors. So this is another story that kind of backs up what Ms. Tree and others who like Jeff Sessions on this site are trying to say, is that, hey, Sessions, he's not leaking stuff. It's Mueller leaking all this stuff, and it's Democrats leaking all this stuff, but this stuff's not being leaked by Sessions about whatever investigations he may have going on. He's keeping the lid on it. That's why it looks like he's doing nothing. But actually, he's got people behind the scenes working on these investigations who are very busy, and when the time comes, he's going to pounce. And we just have to be patient. This is what is being, talked about here. And I think that I would give that a high degree of backing. I support that. I think that's probably true. We know that Mueller has to leak tons of stuff because his entire investigation is a farce. The Mueller is just the propaganda launderer. He's the guy whose job is to keep dropping tons and tons of leaks and stuff so the media can run the program, which is a propaganda program weaponizing information. He's giving them information, leaking it to the press so they can weaponize it to try to drive down Trump supporters and try to build support for people in the country to impeach Trump. So that Mueller can do all this as an October surprise and the whole 9 yards. But at this point, it appears that Sessions is not doing that, and even the IG if you look at the IG, he's not leaking all kinds of stuff. Nothing comes out of the IG, and he's investigating all kinds of stuff on the inside. The only thing we get from the IG is what he and Sessions, and to some extent, I guess Rodenstein has no choice. But when the IG wants us to know something, the IG wanted us to know about the insurance policy, or he wouldn't have let that out. The IG is the one who let that out. He's the one who let it out about Page and Strzok and all the other stuff. He's the one that's approved the release. He's the one that produced all that. So apparently the IG, Horowitz, he leaks, but he only leaks what he wants us to see for whatever reason. Sessions doesn't leak really anything, as best as we can tell. So very interesting. We have the Sessions, which is, I guess, is the IG investigation, or part of it. He's also got his own little thing going on, as we understand. Remember, Sessions brought in Huber back in November. We didn't hear a peep about that until March. Huber was brought in, 6 months, almost 7 months, before we ever even had a sniff of it. No reporters even had a sniff of it. Nobody heard anything about Mr. Huber, and he had been in place for over 6 months when we finally learned about him. And we only learned about him because Sessions was forced. Otherwise, if Sessions wasn't forced to let them know that he had brought in Mr. Huber, we still wouldn't know it. I wonder who else he's brought in. I wonder what else he's got going on. That's why I say, I'm with a lot of you people that Sessions has frustrated me. I don't understand a lot what's going on, but maybe I'm not supposed to. Maybe none of us are. But I would be very, very careful and being 100% down on Sessions until we see this thing play itself out, because in the end, it just might turn out that Sessions was on the right side of the game and actually was doing it the right way with his investigation. I don't 100% know that. I hope that's true. I don't 100% know it, though. I hope it's true, but it's certainly, I find it hard myself to be 100% convinced that Sessions is a bad dude here. I find that hard to believe. The evidence suggests it, but there's too much we don't know. So I remain neutral on Sessions until this thing plays itself out. There's evidence certainly to suggest he's playing possum. What we see on the outside may not be exactly what's happening behind the scenes. We just have to continue to watch and see what happens. But in the comments section, feel free to opine either way. Love him, hate him. It's totally your call, my friends. Your call. Let's see. Here's a good question. Also, that's being pointed out in the American Thinker. That's part of this story about Sessions possibly being laying low in the grass, like a snake in the grass. He asked the question in this article, American Thinker, why did Gowdy and Nunes express surprising patience after the meeting to get the unredacted name? So this is a good question. We know that after Nunes and Gowdy went over with the express intent of getting that name that was blacked out in the EC, that we're told by Peter King that they didn't get it, or that they didn't get to see the document. But they didn't appear to have any problem with it, because afterwards neither of them did an actual press conference, which they normally do. They released a joint statement, and that joint statement was almost praising the AG and the AAG and the people in the meeting for their cooperation, even though they didn't get what they wanted. And they were there threatening with subpoena. They were there to say, hey, either you give up that name either you give up the name. They'd subpoenaed this. You give up the name, it's under subpoena, or if not, we're going to have a vote, contempt of Congress. But after the meeting, after not getting what they wanted, according to Peter King, then they come out, and they're not talking about moving forward now, having a vote. They're not talking about that. They're not even bad-mouthing. They're not doing any interview. They release a public statement, a joint statement, that suggests that they're happy with what happened, even though they didn't get what they want. And they're not talking about threatening anymore, threatening to get that name, threatening impeachment or contempt of Congress or anything else. The threats have gone away, and they didn't get what they want. Why is that? Well, it is suggested in this piece by American Thinker is because maybe they learned that a criminal investigation is underway, possibly by Mr. Huber, and that revealing that name or making that name public may compromise the investigation in some way. And so, maybe they were given the name but not shown it. Maybe they weren't shown it at all. Maybe they were told they can see it at a later date. Maybe they were told that they're going to be learning that name very soon when the IG report comes out. Maybe they were told it's part of an investigation. There's something that happened in that meeting, no question about it, that got Nunes and Gowdy to back down, to stop the threats, and to accept that that name is not going to be unredacted and made available. Is it because of a criminal investigation? Is that what they were told? Hey, you guys, stop pushing. What you want to do, your Senate investigation, which cannot produce a single prosecution, is currently, this is being taken care of. Now it's just a matter of whether Gowdy and Nunes believe it's being taken care of. And that's probably Nunes' big problem, is I don't trust you guys. I don't trust you guys to prosecute these criminals. That's why we want a special prosecutor. Something had to be done to give Gowdy and Nunes some comfort that this is all going to be taken care of. And I don't know what that was, but it's worth watching. The FBI is telling us that it was the Papadopoulos Downer incident that was the reason to launch the Trump-Russia investigation. Now that we know that Papadopoulos was set up, likely by Stefan Halper, working for the State Department, Brennan, and Comey, then shouldn't the entire investigation by Mueller be null and void? Yes, it should be. And they should start a real investigation. A political espionage investigation against the Trump campaign by the Obama administration, the DOJ, the FBI, and the Justice Department, as well as the State Department, and, unfortunately, certain elements of British government, specifically British intelligence. Because the FBI is essentially telling us, from what we've learned about this informant, that the Pops Downer meeting incident was the reason to launder the to start the Trump-Russia investigation. If we find out that Mr. Halper was in play before the Papadopoulos meeting with Downer, that entire thing will be out the window, and at that point, Mueller will almost certainly have to shut it down. And I think the next question on everybody's mind will be, what did Mueller know, and when did he know it? Did Mueller find out about Mr. Halper? When did he find out about Mr. Halper? And why, after finding out about Mr. Halper, did he continue to pursue his investigation into Trump-Russia collusion, knowing good and well it was all a setup? That would make Mr. Mueller, the special executioner, liable. That would put him into criminal liability. And it's very likely that that's where all this is going. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with another TowerGate. You guys enjoy your evening. Take care. Bye.